The $400,000 job. Imagine getting offered one of the most powerful jobs on earth. You get access to the White House. You command the most powerful military in the world. You influence taxes, trade, regulation, foreign policy, and government spending. Hundreds of millions of people know your name, and yet, your official salary is $400,000 a year. That's it, for a position that can influence decisions worth billions, or even trillions of dollars. The paycheck itself isn't particularly impressive. So here's the question. Why does America spend billions of dollars trying to decide who gets this $400,000 job? Because the salary isn't really the story. The real economic value of the presidency comes from everything surrounding the position, the campaign required to reach it, the power attached to it, the network built while holding it, and the opportunities that can appear after leaving it. Today, we're going to follow the money from the beginning of a presidential campaign all the way to life after the White House. And by the end, you'll understand why the presidency is much more than a government paycheck. If you enjoy breaking down money, business, power, and the systems behind them, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Let's start with the most expensive part, getting there. Chapter 1. The most expensive job application in America. Running for president isn't like applying for a normal job. You don't send a resume, you don't have an interview, and you definitely don't get a call from human resources. Instead, you spend months or even years convincing millions of people that you're capable of running the country. And before voters can even make that decision, you need an organization capable of reaching them. That means employees, offices, travel, polling, legal teams, technology, advertising, fundraising, and consultants. A serious presidential campaign can operate more like a large corporation than a traditional political office. The difference is that the company has an expiration date. Election day, when the election arrives, the entire operation reaches its final test. You either win, or the organization you spent years building may disappear almost overnight. This creates one of the strangest financial incentives in politics. Candidates need money to become competitive, but they often need to look competitive before donors want to give them serious money. Imagine two candidates. One has raised $5 million. The other has raised $150 million. Both claim they can win. Which one looks more convincing to a wealthy donor? Probably the second, because money isn't only paying for advertisements. It's sending a message. It tells donors that other people believe the candidate is viable. And once a campaign starts looking viable, fundraising can accelerate. More money creates more exposure. More exposure creates more supporters. More supporters create more donations. And the cycle continues. But somebody has to start that cycle. And that's where fundraising becomes one of the most important skills a presidential candidate can have. Chapter 2. Following the campaign money. The first layer of campaign funding comes from ordinary Americans. Someone gives $10. Another person gives $50. Another gives $100. Modern campaigns can reach millions of people through email, text messages, social media, and online advertising. A small donation doesn't look impressive by itself, but millions of small donations can create a huge financial operation. Then there are wealthy individuals, people with the ability to contribute much larger amounts within the legal limits. There are also bundlers. These are people who use their personal and professional networks to bring large numbers of donors into a campaign. But the campaign itself isn't the entire political money machine. Outside political organizations can also spend enormous amounts. Super PACs are a major example. They can accept very large contributions and spend money supporting or opposing candidates, while remaining legally independent from the candidate's campaign. That created a political environment where a candidate can have an official campaign, while an entire network of outside organizations is simultaneously spending money around the same election. This is one reason presidential campaign spending can become so enormous. You're not dealing with one bank account. You're dealing with an ecosystem. Campaign committees, political parties, independent groups, donor networks, advertising organizations, and advocacy groups. All of them can be participating in the same political battle. And that money eventually has to go somewhere. Which brings us to the people who make a living from elections. Chapter 3. The campaign machine. A major presidential campaign needs an enormous workforce. campaign managers, finance directors, pollsters, digital strategists, researchers, media teams, communication staff, field organizers, lawyers, compliance officers, data analysts, and countless other specialists. Then there's advertising, television, streaming, social media, search engines, radio, mail, online video. The campaign is constantly buying attention. And unlike a normal business, the campaign can't simply advertise once and move on. The message changes constantly. An opponent attacks. The campaign responds. A debate happens. The strategy changes. A poll moves. Advertising changes. A scandal appears. More communication follows. Everything happens in real time. And as election day approaches, spending can become extreme. Campaigns aren't just trying to convince voters. They're trying to identify which voters matter most, which states are competitive, which voters are undecided, which supporters need to be reminded to vote. Where will another $1 million make the biggest difference? At that point, presidential politics starts, looking remarkably similar to a massive marketing operation. Except the product isn't a phone or a car, it's a person. And the customer is deciding who gets control of the government. Chapter 4. The personal cost of running. There's another side of presidential campaigns that doesn't get nearly as much attention. The candidate can personally pay a price. Imagine leaving a successful career to spend 18 months traveling around the country. You're raising money all day, giving speeches, attending events, talking to reporters, debating opponents, meeting voters, and managing an organization that can spend millions of dollars every week. Meanwhile, your normal career is effectively on hold. And if you lose, you don't simply lose an election. You may have to figure out what comes next. Some candidates return to private business. Others become political commentators. Some write books. Some become consultants. Others leave national politics entirely. This is one reason presidential politics tends to favor people who already have strong networks, significant resources, or the ability to attract huge numbers of donors. Because running isn't just about having a good idea. You need enough money and organization to survive long enough for voters to hear it. Chapter 5. What you actually get if you win. Now imagine that everything works. You raise the money. You survive the primaries. You win the general election. You're officially president of the United States. So what does the job actually provide? The salary is $400,000 a year. But that's only one part of the package. The president lives and works at the White House. There is a large staff supporting the household and the administration. There are government aircraft. There is extensive security. There are communication systems. There is medical support. There is transportation. And there is an enormous logistical operation surrounding nearly every presidential movement. When the president travels, it's not simply a matter of getting onto an airplane. Security teams move. Staff members move. Vehicles move. Advanced teams prepare locations. Communications equipment has to be available. Local authorities coordinate security. And all of that costs money. The president also has access to Camp David, the presidential retreat in Maryland. And then there's the Secret Service. Protection doesn't simply mean standing beside the president. It means planning movements, securing buildings, monitoring threats, coordinating with local authorities, and protecting the president's family. So when people say, the president only earns $400,000, they're technically talking about salary. They're not describing the economic resources surrounding the office. And those resources become even more interesting after the president leaves. Chapter 6. Life after the White House. This is where the financial story changes. Because leaving the presidency doesn't mean becoming an ordinary person again. A former president still has something incredibly valuable, a globally recognized name. Imagine spending 4 or 8 years at the center of American politics. You've met foreign leaders, corporate executives, military officials, scientists, journalists, celebrities, other politicians. You've been involved in decisions that made international headlines, and millions of people have watched you do it. That creates an enormous public profile, and public attention can become an economic asset. One obvious example is speaking. Former presidents can command substantial fees for appearances at corporate events, conferences, universities, and private gatherings. Why would an organization pay so much? Because they're not simply buying a speech. They're buying the attention surrounding the person. A former president can make an event feel more important. They attract audiences, they create publicity, and their presence can give an organization prestige. Then there's publishing. Presidential memoirs can become major commercial products. Publishers aren't just selling a book, they're selling access to the memories of someone who occupied the most powerful office in the country. Then come documentaries, television projects, podcasts, production companies, foundations, and other media opportunities. The presidency creates attention, and attention can be monetized. Chapter 7. The value of a presidential brand. Here's a simple way to understand it. Imagine two speakers walk onto a stage. One is a successful executive. The other is a former president. Both might be intelligent. Both might have interesting things to say. But the former president carries something different. Recognition, authority, history. A globally known name. That name can sell tickets, attract media coverage, bring important people into the room, and increase the perceived importance of the event. That's why the post-presidential market can be so valuable, but it's not automatic. Being president doesn't guarantee that someone will become extremely wealthy afterward. The person still needs demand. They need an audience. They need something people want to hear. And they need opportunities to turn their reputation into revenue. Some former presidents become major authors. Others become sought-after speakers. Some build foundations. Others enter media. The presidency creates the platform. What happens afterward depends on how effectively that platform is used. Chapter 8. The long shadow of a presidency. There's another institution that can keep a former president relevant for decades. The Presidential Library or Presidential Center. These institutions preserve documents, artifacts, exhibits, and historical material connected to an administration. But they can become much more than museums. They can host conferences, educational programs, public discussions, private events, fundraising activities, and major political figures. Private fundraising can support the construction and operation of these institutions, creating organizations that continue long after the president has left office. That matters because political influence doesn't necessarily disappear when a term ends. The network can remain. The relationships can remain. The donors can remain. And the former president can continue to have a platform. A presidency might last for years. Its institutional footprint can last generations. Chapter 9. Why billionaires care about presidential elections. Now we reach the question that explains much of the money flowing into politics. Why would someone spend millions trying to influence an election? Because government decisions can be incredibly valuable. Think about the industries affected by Washington: energy, banking, healthcare, technology, defense, transportation, agriculture, pharmaceuticals, telecommunications. A single government decision can affect an entire industry. A regulatory change can alter business costs. A government contract can be worth billions. A tax change can dramatically alter profits. A trade policy can reshape supply chains. So for a company worth tens of billions of dollars, political decisions aren't abstract. They're financially important. This doesn't mean every political donation is secretly a business transaction. People donate because of beliefs, values, parties, candidates, social issues. But there is also a straightforward economic incentive. If government policy can affect billions of dollars of value, then influencing government becomes financially significant. That helps explain why political spending has become such a massive industry. Chapter 10. The revolving door. Now look at the people working around the candidate. A campaign hires consultants. Those consultants gain experience. Some move into government. Others join lobbying firms. Some work for corporations. Some return to political campaigns. And the cycle continues. Why are these people valuable? Because they understand how the system works. They know the political players. They understand agencies. They know the language. They know the process. And they have relationships. That creates what is commonly called the political revolving door. People move between government, campaigns, lobbying, consulting, and private industry. The election also creates a huge market for companies that support campaigns. Advertising agencies, technology firms, pollsters, data companies, law firms, event companies, printing businesses, hotels, transportation providers, media platforms. When billions of dollars enter an election cycle, businesses throughout that ecosystem receive revenue. The candidate may be the face of the campaign, but thousands of other people are economically connected to the process. Chapter 11. When politics and business collide. Modern politics has also produced situations where personal branding and political power overlap. Donald Trump is an especially obvious example because he entered the presidency with a large commercial brand already attached to his name. Hotels, golf properties, real estate, licensing, media, membership clubs. That created questions that previous presidents hadn't faced on the same scale. What happens when people who want access to the administration also spend money at businesses associated with the president? What happens when foreign officials stay at those properties? What happens when political supporters join clubs where the president spends time? These questions created major legal and political debates. But economically, they demonstrated something important. A powerful public identity can affect the value of a private brand, and the relationship can work in both directions. Business can create political recognition. Political recognition can create business attention. That doesn't mean the value is guaranteed. Markets can move, companies can lose money, brands can become less popular. But the underlying principle is powerful. Attention has economic value, and the presidency creates an extraordinary amount of attention. Chapter 12. Why campaigns keep getting more expensive. Presidential elections have become dramatically more expensive over the decades. Part of the reason is technology. Television created a huge advertising market. The internet created digital fundraising. Social media created instant distribution. Data technology allowed campaigns to target voters with incredible precision. And every election creates an incentive to spend more. If one candidate buys more advertising, the other candidate has an incentive to respond. If one campaign builds a larger digital operation, the other builds one too. If fundraising becomes more sophisticated, campaigns invest even more heavily in fundraising. It becomes an arms race. Nobody has to officially decide to make elections more expensive. Competition does it automatically. One campaign spends more, the opponent responds. Donors increase their contributions. Consultants increase their capacity. Advertising platforms receive more money. And the next election starts from a higher baseline. Over several decades, those increases compound. Eventually, presidential politics becomes a multi-billion-dollar industry. Chapter 13. What are you actually buying? So when billions of dollars are spent during a presidential election, what is all that money actually purchasing? Not votes. You can't legally buy votes. You're buying the ability to compete for attention. You're buying communication, organization, reach, data, staff, visibility, and time in front of voters. A campaign might spend millions trying to convince people in a particular state that its candidate understands their concerns. Another campaign spends millions trying to convince the same people of the opposite. The money doesn't guarantee the result. That's important. A candidate can spend enormous amounts and still lose. But money gives campaigns the ability to stay in the fight. And in a close election, even small differences in communication can matter. That's why wealthy donors and political organizations are willing to spend so much. The presidency controls enormous amounts of political and economic influence, and the competition for that influence has become extraordinarily expensive. Chapter 14. The real value of the presidency. Now we can answer the question we started with. What is the presidency actually worth? The salary is $400,000. But the economic value isn't contained in that number. The office provides enormous institutional resources. It creates global visibility. It creates relationships. It creates historical significance. It creates a platform. And potentially, it creates decades of opportunities after leaving office. But perhaps the most important asset is influence. The president sits at the center of the executive branch. Federal agencies affect major industries. Government spending affects businesses and workers. Regulation affects markets. Foreign policy affects international commerce. Appointments affect how government operates. So the presidency isn't valuable because the person receives a massive paycheck. It's valuable because of what the person can influence while holding the position. Chapter 15. The final calculation. Imagine two people. The first spends years building a political career. Eventually, they become president. They serve 2 terms. Afterward, they write books, give speeches, build a foundation, appear in documentaries, continue participating in public life. The salary they received was substantial. but their post-presidential opportunities may become worth far more. Now imagine someone who was already extremely wealthy before becoming president. For that person, the presidency doesn't need to create wealth from scratch. It can amplify an existing brand. Their name becomes more recognizable. Their audience grows. Their influence expands. Their businesses receive more attention. Again, the office isn't necessarily the source of the wealth. It can be the amplifier. And that distinction explains a lot about the economics of political power. Conclusion: the paycheck isn't the point. So the next time you hear that the President of the United States earns $400,000 a year, remember something. That's the salary. It isn't the entire economic story. The campaign to reach the presidency can cost billions. Thousands of people make their living from the political ecosystem. Companies earn money selling advertising, technology, consulting, research, transportation, and other services to campaigns. Donors spend enormous amounts because the decisions made by government can have enormous consequences. And after leaving office, a former president can potentially spend decades turning their name, experience, and reputation into books, speeches, media projects, foundations, and other opportunities. The presidency itself may only last 4 or 8 years, but the network created around it can last much longer. That's why looking at the paycheck misses the point. The real value of the presidency isn't simply what the government pays you. It's the combination of power, access, attention, reputation, and influence that comes with the position. And that's why a $400,000 salary can sit at the center of a political economy worth billions. The strange part isn't that America spends so much money on presidential elections. The strange part is how much economic value can be attached to one person winning. Because when the person in the Oval Office can influence decisions affecting entire industries, the competition for that seat becomes much bigger than a normal job search. It's a competition for influence. It's a competition for access. It's a competition for control over one of the most powerful institutions on earth. And once you understand that, the billions surrounding a presidential election start to make a lot more sense. If you enjoyed this breakdown, subscribe and turn on notifications, because there's a lot more money hiding behind the systems we see every day. And once you learn how to follow the money, politics starts looking very different.